Good evening, everybody. Tonight we got Rick Harris with us. He's going to show us some advanced topics of FPP and a little preview of FPP8. Take it away, Rick.
All right, let me share my screen here. Technical difficulty. There we go. Alrighty, is my screen showing now?
Yes, it is.
All right, I'm Rick Harris. I've been involved in animated light shows for almost 7 years now. I'm part of the FPP development team, mostly in testing and documentation, and we're going to go over advanced FPPs. It's really not going to be so much advanced, but maybe some of the things that you weren't aware that it could do, and some advanced features as well. I'm not going to go into detail on all the different advanced things because that's going to be a whole class in itself, but at least just to kind of give you an idea of some of the things that it can do and might help you do some of the more complex things. So I want to talk a little bit about development. This year there was a huge problem with the new development. It took a little bit longer because of the Raspberry Pi 5 compatibility. The Raspberry Pi 5 was basically a completely rebuilt under the hood system. So there was a lot of things that had to be done to get it to work. And it was very challenging for the developers. And they spent a lot of time getting it to go. And of course, they fix bugs every year. Every year they try and do some performance enhancements and also improve the user experience. So what's new in V8? I'll talk a little bit. DPI pixels, which was one of the biggest challenges, it moved to the KMS buffer. It was on the HDMI buffer, but now it's on the KMS buffer because the Pi 5 HDMI buffer wouldn't work with the DPI pixels. But what that means is now both HDMI ports are going to be available, and they might be able to leverage that in the future. They added some file manager enhancements. You can sort, filter, and even you got some image thumbnails. They improved the reboot on on the Raspberry Beagle system, especially the Pocket Beagle, so that helps. There's now a servo output for capes that have servos, and Culp has a new servo hat that works pretty well with things like 3-axis skulls. Enhance some of the warning messages. Now you can use remote scheduling for FPP commands. If you're running kiosk, you can configure the home page that when it boots up where it goes to. They added NVMe support, and they added the ability to bulk delete the xLights overlay fonts. So I think the best thing would be just to go through FPP and look at each one. So here, just as an FYI, if you see any red or orange messages up on top, that means that you should probably fix it. A red means you almost always are going to have a problem unless you fix it. So we have a FPP device here that's set to remote mode, but there's a schedule set to play. So that's probably not what you want. So if you see any red or orange messages, you need to get those fixed. So let me change that to player. Now it says the FPP schedule is disabled. Well, that might or might not cause you a problem. If you have a schedule scheduled and it's disabled, then obviously it's not going to play. So let's go on the status page. There's really not a whole lot new here or advanced, except for maybe the auto scroll playlist item. And what this will do is if you have a large show that's playing, it will automatically center what is playing in that screen. Some people like it, some people don't, so that's why it's an option. So if you have, I don't have that many items on this one. So yeah, so if you had a lot of items, whatever was playing would be centered so that you could see it. Network settings. So there is the ability that you can add a new interface, and this is good for some of the hats or capes where you don't have the hat or cape installed, especially like the Pocket Beagles. And so they don't have the WLAN 0 interface. So you could add the WLAN 0 interface without it being active. And the next time you boot it, it will be available to log into. You can configure it with the SSID and everything. Also, too, you can have the FPP device act as a DHCP server. You have some controllers that they have to be connected to a DHCP server, or if you want them to automatically connect because they're configured for DHCP, you can do that. But be very careful. You only want one device in your network to be a DHCP server. So if you are not familiar how DHCP servers work, I would be very cautious about using this. Now, IP forwarding, a lot of people get this kind of confused. If you are using what's commonly referred to as a separate show network, where you're having an FPP device that's forwarding from your WLAN 0 to your ETH 0, and you're not using a proxy host, then you want to configure IP forwarding, but you configure that on your network, your internet side. So typically that would be your WLAN 0 interface. And typically you want to set it up for masquerading NAT. That way the traffic will go two ways. Multisync. So multisync, this is kind of like the Swiss Army knife of FPP. It gives you a snapshot of all your FPP devices, how they're connected, Wi-Fi, wireless, what type of platform it is, what version it's on, if it needs to be upgraded, the utilization, all of that. And we now have the filters up here where you could sort it. If you have a whole lot of items, you can sort it, or you say you want to just look at your Raspberry Pis, you can filter by that. And you see even this gives you an error message on one of the remotes. I'm not actually logged into this system, but it shows the error that's popping up on that system. Another thing you can do is you can take all types of different actions on any of the devices in here. Let me set this to all. And you could say you want to upgrade your FPP devices. So you select over here which devices you want to take action on. And if you want to upgrade, you can upgrade and run. It'll go through and upgrade all of them. Or you can restart or reboot. Any of these options you can do from here. So you can kind of work with a lot of different things right from this page. FPP settings, there's really nothing advanced in here except if you want to see some of the advanced options. Set the user interface to advanced to be able to see them. We typically suggest keeping it basic unless you need the advanced because things are filtered by what you need. But there are some things that you might want to use for advanced. Be careful with using experimental or developer because that'll give you the option to select some things and make some changes that you might not want to do and could cause problems. Some people don't realize that you could set the color here, the header, to see what the different devices are. And if I go back to the multisync page, that'll even show you. You see here, I've got a blue one and a green one. So these devices, that's what the header is. So you can color code your devices to help you out if that's something that you want or need. There's really not a whole lot in here that's going to be needed unless you want to switch to like an NVMe. You could go in here. FPP backup. Now FPP will keep backups. Every time you make a change, it'll keep a backup. So if you mess something up, you can go back and restore it back to that certain point in time, kind of like a restore point in Windows. So you have the different backups. They've got the JSON configuration backup, which will basically is just configuration. Then you have file copy, which will copy everything that you want. And there's a lot of different options that you can select. One neat feature is that you can take your FPP and back it up to one of your other FPP devices. So if you have, like in my case, I have a player and like 7 or 8 remotes, depending on what I'm doing. I could back it up to a remote FPP. You select which FPP you want it, and it will back it up to that, and then you could restore it. So that way, if that device crashes, it's actually stored on a different one. And this is telling me that rsync is disabled on the remote host, so you have to go over and set it. So that's why I was talking about some enhanced warning. You say what things you want to save, and then you have everything all backed up. Proxy setting, there's really nothing advanced in there. Command presets, this is something that is a very powerful tool. One real common preset is some people have devices where they want them to run 24 hours, and they'll go in, they'll create a 24-hour schedule or have it start a minute before midnight, a minute after midnight. But FPP has what's called some system event commands. And you have FPPD started. So anytime FPPD starts, you can take that action. Or if FPPD stops, you can take that action. Or playlist started. There's a whole bunch of things that whatever happens here, you can do it. So you could maybe say you want a playlist started, and then you want to do an FPP command to do to mail you. You could have it set up to where it will email you when something happens. And then you can select any of these options in the FPP commands. And this is, you don't have to use the preset ones. You can, these are just the system ones, but there's a lot of different commands that you can use in that. Effects, nothing really in there. Display testing, there's not too much in there advanced really. If you select Multisync, it'll send the data out to all of your devices. You do have the option where you can set the increment for the start and end. And say you have a string that you're wanting to test and figure out where the end is or something like that. You could set the number of channels and then just increase it by 3 and keep going. And then you can see where the end of your string ends. And that would kind of help it find out if you have some sort of bad pixel or something with that. And if you're testing servos, you can go down to the single channel patterns and test servos from there. And that finishes that. Content setup, file manager. So on here, oh, you know what? Nope, I don't have any images. So they have the you have the file sorter here, and so you can select the files, the size. So that's new. You can disable it if you want. On the images, and I had to re-image this device, and I forgot to upload the images, but this will actually show a thumbnail of that. Let me see if I can. Yeah, I don't have one there. So it'll actually give you a thumbnail image, so you could see the images. So my apologies, I didn't have that. I last minute had to re-image something and forgot it. Playlists. So you have the different playlists in here. One thing that some people don't realize is that you can use a playlist inside a playlist. So you might have something that you play every night, but in different ones, and you can use that playlist. Another thing is the branch. You could do some neat things with the branch. So you see here, I have it set, the volume is set at 70. So when this playlist starts, it starts at the volume set at 70. And then when it first starts, it looks and it says, hey, is it after 10 o'clock? If it's after 10 o'clock, you want to offset 1, which means skip to the next item. So it sets the volume to 50. If it's not, then you offset 2, which means just continue. So at 10 o'clock, the volume is going to go down to 50. So maybe you live in a neighborhood where you want the volume to go down at a certain point in time. This will do it. And every time it cycles through, it'll check the time, and then it'll adjust according to what it is. There's a lot of other options that you can do with that as well.
Hey, Rick.
Yeah.
So what if you have randomized? How will that work?
No, then it's going to randomize it. It's going to mess it up.
Okay.
What you could do is probably put the branch and the command in a playlist.
And yeah, just when it hits it, it'll do that. Yeah, good point.
Yeah, so if you put it in a playlist, then that playlist is going to have that branch and the volume set in there. But if you have this set to randomize, then yeah, that offset isn't going to work. Skip repository browser, there's nothing new in there. Plugin manager. Now we have tested a bunch of the plugins, and anything that is FPP 8 compatible, it will show up as compatible, and these here have not been tested. You see, we've got a lot of them tested that we know that they work, and it's most of the popular ones. After Hours Music, we haven't. We don't have access to this to change it. So it's most of the popular ones. Yep.
Hey, Rick, if you go back to Manager, you might want to touch on MP3 gain in audio, because I'm not sure a lot of people know about that.
Okay. So in the audio tab, you could do MP3 gain on here. So you could, if you want to get all of your music files to be normalized, you could select which ones you want, and then hit MP3 gain, and it'll adjust the volume so that they're all normalized. And then it'll also print a log to tell you what it did to it. So if you've got various volumes, you can use the MP3 gain to adjust that. Channel outputs, not a whole lot on here. Let me go to this one here. On the channel outputs, if you've got ports configured, you can test from the ports, and there's some pretty neat testing features. You can do like port number, and what that'll do is the first number of pixels that are white will indicate the port. So if you've got 4 white pixels and the rest are doing red, green, and blue, then you know it's port 4. Another neat one is the pixel count by port. What that will do is that will light up every 50th pixel in white. So if you're, like, say you're wiring a prop and you're wanting to keep track and make sure that you're on track where you should be, then when you get to the 50th pixel, it'll be white, and then you can tell. And the same thing for pixel count by string. But what that will do is if you have several models on one port, it restarts the count for each model. Then you have the normal red, green, blue, and white fade. Channel out, well, I already did. And then you have some of the others. There's a bunch of different types of outputs. For DMX, you've got the HTTP virtual display, MQTT for sending stuff out. If you're doing servos, the PCA 9685, and a bunch of different devices. Pixel overlay models. So the pixel overlay models, if you upload the models from xLights to your FPP device, and actually I should go to a Pi 8. Let me do that. I probably don't have anything else. Yeah, so you have the delete xLights generated. If you upload models from xLights, those are what's basically a manually configured model. And if you manually configure a model, FPP is going to assume that that is the correct model because you might be doing something special with it. So if you have an auto-created model, which is generated from the way the strings are, the xLights generated model might override it. It's usually better to not upload models from xLights and use the auto-created one. There's a few cases where you might want to do specialized testing or something like that and upload the models, but it's usually better just to use the auto-created models. But if you have a bunch of those xLights models, and I've seen times where people came in and they had like 30, 40 different models on there, and they go, well, I haven't had those in my show for years. Well, now you can just go in and click this and it'll delete them all. The GPIO inputs. This here is something where you can use the GPIO pins to trigger inputs. You can actually do 2 commands for each one. depending on how it is, you have a rising edge command and a falling edge command, which usually you don't want to do both, but there might be a case where you want to do both. But you can select just about any of the GPIO pins, and you can select what you want it to do with any of the FPP commands. And there's a whole lot of FPP commands that you can do. Well, that helps that. The About page, there's not a whole lot on the About page. Oh, doesn't want to go there. There we go. From here, this is going to tell you if you have an update. This is going to be just an FPP update, and you would use the upgrade FPP. Then you have the OS if you want to upgrade the OS version. And you always want to make sure that your OS version is compatible with the version that you're running here. And if you want to tell what version you should be running now, in the master branch, it's a little bit more difficult because you could switch OS builds through the master. So those are kind of hard to tell. But if you want to tell the regular version, you can see here where it says 7.3.1, you're supposed to be on 2023.11. If you're on 7.4, you should be on 2023.12. 7.5, you see there was no OS version change, 2023.12. So the OS version should match what that FPP version is. And what it is, the OS is kind of like if you're running Windows 7, and that would be the OS. So if you're running Windows 7, Windows 10, and the FPP would be like if you're running Windows Word 97 or 20 or 365. And you'd select the FPP OS that you'd want to update to and upgrade OS. When it comes to upgrading, I would say upgrade every time something new comes out, unless your show is running. If your show is running, I would not upgrade anything. Now, if there's something that's not working, then you might want to consider upgrading. It might be a bug that they fixed. Another neat thing is you can see here your disk utilization, if you want to see your schedules and stuff. And you can actually go to that. If you want to go to your schedules, you can click on the link, your playlist. All of these are shortcuts to that individual area. The manual, forums, help index. If you're into development and you want to see what all the different APIs do, you can look in here, say you want to see what a playlist API looks like. Here it'll tell you what it is. If you test it and do the get. So I don't have any playlist playing, but you can see what that get or post would do based on this. So you can actually test your API if you're wanting to develop something with that. System health check is a good one that you should do. So this here, it says playlist 12, it's scheduled, but the system is running in remote mode. So it tells me that I have some sort of warning. So that's a good help too. And another real good one is the troubleshooting commands. So the troubleshooting commands, it's now organized to where you could select what you want to check and see. Say you want to see what your CPU and memory is doing. You can see what's being used, uptime, utilization. So this here is like some more detailed troubleshooting to get into FPP, the different devices or interfaces, and see what's going on. And that covers most of the FPP. There is in one thing that, where did we go? In FPP, there is now an FPP command timing track, which works really well. So you can have an FPP command trigger something on your FPP device. And it doesn't matter if it's a player or a remote, it'll do it. And because sequences are static, once it's burnt in, it's burnt in. So in this case here, I have a P10 panel that was displaying, actually show you, it was displaying just a little graphic for a mini that I went to. But I wanted it to show how many days until Christmas. So I had the simple countdown running, and obviously you're not going to see it here because that's part of the plugin. But it would run the countdown, say, hey, it's so many days, so many hours until Christmas. Then it would play the Welcome to the Mini, and then the countdown would play again. So that's good. Like if you want, maybe you have a snow machine, and when the song says let it snow, let it snow, let it snow, you could trigger the snow machine to turn on, blow a bunch of snow from the sequence, and then turn the snow machine off. So that's a pretty good functionality. Or you could have it set up to where maybe you have all your lights set up. So you have an opening sequence and it turns your porch light and everything off, turns your landscape lights off, whatever you want. So any FPP command, you can actually have it triggered as part of a sequence, which is a pretty good help. And I think that pretty much covers most of it. Are there any questions?
Hey, Rick, on that FPP command, can you review that? Like, you obviously put in there as a timing track, but what do you have in there, and how does that tie actually to FPP?
Okay, so you have to, in your FPP device, you would have to do an FPP, a command preset. So in that case, that one we would call it run countdown. Whatever you want to name. You can give it a preset slot if you don't want to type the name. And then you would, I don't think I have, I don't have that plugin installed on here. Well, I can do that.
But it could be anything, right? Just, anything.
Yeah, I can install it real quick.
So that name in there matches exactly the name you're giving it here.
Yeah. So whatever you name it, you just match it. So
Right below. So all the way at the bottom of the list.
mode.
2, 3, 3.
So there you go. So simple countdown run. That's the FPP command to run that plugin, and obviously you'd have to configure the plugin to say whatever it is that whatever it is that you want. It is whatever up. And I didn't save it, so I'll have to do it again. So then in FP, so now this has a command preset. Whenever it gets that command run countdown, it'll run that. So here I have run countdown, change it. And each time it gets to, and it's only going to, right when it gets to that point, it's not going to run that entire length because that run countdown just is, it plays one time. So you might have to adjust the timing to get it to go. I just put it that whole length so you can kind of see what it says.
Can you also use that to set the brightness of your pixels?
Yep. Any FPP command, you could do that. So you could have it, set the brightness, set the volume up, volume down.
Anybody else have any questions? Well, Rick, I want to thank you for doing this. It gives us a lot of insight to look for other ways that we can improve our shows.
Cool.
Thank you.
You're welcome.